Good morning and afternoon. We're just going to give folks a few seconds to get in before I get started.
Ebony, you want me to play some music until folks trickle in until you want to get started?
No, thank you. We're only going to do it for a minute because we have a really jam-packed agenda.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, it looks like we got those who are on time and punctual here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started in the essence of the time because we do have a jam-packed agenda. So I want to thank you for joining us for our Addressing Seattle's Racial Wealth Divide Summit. We're proud to center today's events on the intersections of funding and investment, engaging in policy design and advocacy, and effective cross-sector collaboration to address the racial wealth divide in Seattle. Today's summit will be recorded and shared afterwards. My name is Ebony White, Prosperity Now Director of Racial Economic Justice, previously known as the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative, where our role is to bring expertise, strategies, practices, and knowledge rooted in racial economic equity to support how best to be in partnership with, in service to, and in support of BIPOC leaders working to advance economic mobility and asset building strategies for those furthest from economic justice. The team provides socioeconomic tailored capacity building and technical assistance to catalyze the leadership, organizational management, service delivery, advocacy, and policy efforts of BIPOC leaders. And we leverage data in partnership with our partners to drive community level interventions to bring forth a racial economic and wealth equity analysis to the field and inform promising best practices, policies, and solutions. Today's summit is part of a larger initiative, the Building High Impact for Nonprofits of Color project that is funded by JP Morgan Chase. The program uses a three-pronged approach to support and partner with BIPOC-led organizations. We equip them with the capacity building, the leadership development to really strengthen and scale the important work that they are already doing. We help deepen the understanding of Seattle's racial wealth divide to better advocate on behalf of their clients, and we advance their visibility and increase their networks to include more funders, local organizations, and asset building institutions to help them work together as thought partners and solution-oriented leaders. The cohort includes Africa Town Community Land Trust, Communities Rise, Urban League, Urban Impact, and the White Center CDA. It has been a pleasure working in partnership and support of them, and their voices and work will be lifted up throughout our time together today. We do have profiles that are available for each of them that will be in the meeting materials, along with bios of all of our guest speakers today. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Gary Cunningham, CEO at Prosperity Now. This morning, he will share with us all his vision for reaching racial economic equity in our country and how Prosperity Now is really working daily to close the racial wealth divide.
Thank you, Ebony, and I'm so excited to be here today. I've spent a lot of time in Seattle over the years working on racial economic equity, and I see on the agenda today is my good friend, Michael Brown from the Seattle Foundation. He and I certainly have done a lot of work together, including working on the African American Leadership Forum some years ago in Seattle. And all I can say is I would really like to be there in person rather than be on these video screens, because every time I come to Seattle, particularly in communities of color, it's such a warm welcome. People are so ingratiating, and I know all of you have been working a long time and suffering and sacrificing a lot to change the economic and social conditions for people of color in the Seattle area. And so my hat is off to you because I've seen the work on the ground. I've seen the sacrifices. I've seen the triumphs as well that Seattle has had. In fact, Seattle actually leads the country in terms of some of the work that's been done on minimum wage, some of the work that's been done on racial economic equity. And so I could say a whole lot more, working in international village with some of my good friends there, and working with the Indian community there as well. But let me stop and say thank you to my staff who are on the line today, that are also making great sacrifices, also really deeply believe in this work, also believe in America that can work well for everyone. In reviewing today's agenda, it just energized me again, because the topics that you will be discussing, like practitioners, philanthropy, business, and government, how do we work together to close the racial wealth divide? And how do we look at the opportunities that are before us? Creating a collaborative space for participants to engage and inform how to center the community in furtherance of policy solutions, and really showcasing how we can work together in dealing with the root causes of racial and economic injustice in America. As you know, Prosperity Now has been around for 45 years, and we've always attempted to center race as part of our work. I do want to say that I've been involved with this organization since 2007. I was a funder for 10 years with the Northwest Area Foundation when I was the vice president of programs. I was on the board of this organization for 5 years, and now I'm the president and CEO. And in that time on the board was really when the work of the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative was created. And I want to thank J.P. Morgan Chase specifically, Naomi Campbell, who I work with, and really said, Gary, we want to do this. We want to do this work to really build institutions in communities of color, so that those strong institutions can actually change lives. And so I want to thank her, but I also want to thank the current members of the J.P. Morgan Chase team that have seen this work through over a number of years. And so we're so pleased and proud to be in Seattle. Prosperity Now engages in advocacy, policy design, research, public awareness, and technical assistance in order to ensure that all communities have a real chance to reach economic stability, security, and ultimately prosperity. A large part of our focus is on facilitating asset building by low income and moderate income folks, and supporting communities on their journeys to reach financial security. And we got a ways to go. We're not there yet. And that's why we're convening today. We're deeply aware of the urgency of this mission of addressing the racial wealth divide in America. As I mentioned earlier, in 2015, Prosperity Now really took off on this journey. And again, it's the team of people that you have before you today that have really made the difference. The racial wealth divide was really charged with developing a clear organizational position on the drivers of racial wealth in this country, defining the appropriate partnerships, and what are the strategies that Prosperity Now could use to engage with folks on the ground. We don't sit on high and write papers about the racial wealth divide. We know that the solutions are sitting with you in the communities that you're in, that you have the knowledge, the skills, the capability, and the ability to drive change within your own community. We also leverage our brand and our networks to make the case to the public and policymakers that specific investment, targeted investment in racial wealth equity, asset building is critical to close the gaps that we have. And ultimately, as my good friend Paul Wellstone once said, we all do better when we all do better. And so the question for us is that if we address the issue of the racial wealth divide in America, we will help everyone in America do better. We also advance best practices in bridging the racial wealth divide among asset building and racial equity organizations like many of you here today. And so the experience of our staff, the experience that you bring to the table, the passion, the commitment, the dedication that all of you have to know that you want this world to be better for yourself, your family, your children, and your community. That's what this work is about. So the high impact nonprofits of color work is dear to my heart, and the folks that are working on it, Madeline's on the phone on the video here, and Ebony is on the phone, and Vanna, and we have a whole team of folks working on this. I am just so proud of this team and what they've been able to come, because they focus on addressing the significant financial insecurities that face families of color by partnering with you, local organizations on the ground that are working on the front lines to address the needs of their community. The organizations, all of you that are involved, actually, you made a decision with what to do with your life. You made a decision of where you were going to base your career. You made a decision that this work of addressing racial economic equity is the work that you were going to take on for your life's work. And so we want to honor that. Again, I want to say thank you to JP Morgan Chase. We are excited to have nonprofit leaders from this initiative with us today, from Seattle, Washington. And this is the beginning of a journey that all of you have been on for a while. So it's not the end, it's not the middle, it is actually, we begin again for all the people that are standing on our shoulders and the people that we are standing on their shoulders. That's why we're doing this work. So I just want to hand the microphone off. Again, thank my fantastic staff. And I want to hand it off to Carla Strickland, who is part of the corporate responsibility in the Northwest region for JP Morgan Chase and Company. Carla.
Thanks so much, Gary. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Ebony, and Madeline for bringing us together, convening this, all of the nonprofit partners that are involved in the cohort, the organizations that are taking time out of their days. I know it's tough over Zoom, especially as we continue on having to just meet virtually and having so many other priorities and initiatives come at us. I appreciate everyone taking the time. Gary and Ebony already shared quite a bit about the program and quite a bit of all of the reasons, honestly, of why we became involved in 2015. We saw a lot of nonprofit organizations, especially led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, doing fantastic work in communities. At that time, we were pretty nascent. Our particular group within the firm was fairly new. And we were charged with developing nonprofit relationships and figuring out how to do a different type of philanthropy than what was currently happening within our organization. We wanted to be flexible and nimble and focus on capacity building, which was new to us. And so partnering with Prosperity Now helped us learn quite a bit over these last few years. As Gary and Ebony have mentioned, this work has taken place in many communities across the country. I actually, at that point in time, was in Miami, and so was fairly involved in the Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color effort there. And in this new role, having been here a few years, was really excited when we had the opportunity to bring it to Seattle. I think what's great, after all these years of doing this work in partnership with Prosperity Now and the cohort leaders on the ground, is seeing where all of the initiatives that are currently happening within our communities to support nonprofits of color that are focused on the asset building space, that are focused on policy advocacy, that are focused on closing the racial wealth divide, and where we can go deeper in this work in our community. So thinking of Communities Rise and the capacity building cohorts that they lead within the community, thinking of the BIPOC ED Coalition and the fantastic work that lays ahead of them, and really making sure that communities of color are centered, and that the strategies and the initiatives that we sort of bring to bear are community driven and supported. So I'm excited about this cohort and where it's going, but also all of the homegrown initiatives that are also taking place where we can be in deeper partnership with you all. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of this convening today. We look forward to learning alongside of all of you. And I will turn it over to Ebony because I know it's a packed day for us. So thank you all.
Thank you, Carla. So I'm going to actually share my screen. One second, guys. Sorry about that. All right. Someone tell me, please, it's the right screen showing.
We see it. We got it.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. So, so at Prosperity Now, we like to ground our conversations in data. It just really provides a way to really pull out a way to connect what the lived experiences are that people are experiencing to what the data is telling us. And so what I'll be doing today is doing an overview of what the racial wealth divide is nationally, and then I'll highlight some of the key data points locally for Seattle. And by doing that, I'm going to talk about some of the root causes. So looking at some of the historical policies and practices that have contributed to the divide and how it's still impacting people today. So we cannot talk about the remedies of the growing economic inequality without properly understanding our past. We will review how this legacy of discrimination has had a direct impact on every dimension of a family's of color life. And I would describe these impacts and intersections as they relate to communal wealth, family wealth, income, housing, and education, to name a few. These photos demonstrate the oppression of Native Americans and African Americans for land and labor in favor of economic gains. Throughout the 246 years of slavery in the US, the forced and free labor from enslaved people and the loss of millions of acres of land allowed white slave owners to accumulate massive amounts of wealth. And cards were stacked from the beginning to systemically exclude people of color from prosperity. The Social Security Act of 1935 excluded a third of all American workers, including farm workers and domestic workers who were predominantly people of color. And for African Americans, the cost of exclusion resulted in a loss of benefits, totaling over $143.20 billion in 2016 dollars. Then there was a mass investment to create an American middle class, and however, this only benefited white Americans. Another compounding factor to the inequality we all see today is a federally sanctioned housing discrimination, where the Federal Housing Administration, along with other public and private sector actors like the Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation, intentionally shut out households of color from the opportunity to purchase a home through the practice of redlining. And despite the Federal Housing Administration's goal of making homeownership accessible to more American households, The underwriting practices it implemented during its first 35 years only resulted in homebuyers of color receiving just 2% of the government-backed mortgages. And ultimately, this practice not only set the stage for homeownership to become the largest driver of the racial wealth divide today, but it also helped to literally set the stage of where communities are living today. And lastly, we have the GI Bill of Rights that assisted veterans with housing, education, and jobs. And between 1944 and 1971, it spent $95 billion on benefits, but it was left to the states to administer. And as a result, Black veterans in the South were denied access. They couldn't get the quality loans for housing or assistance with tuition, many of the things today that drives death in communities of color. There are many more events as to why we see the economic disparities that exist today, from the Civil Rights Act to the Jim Crow laws, but I'm going to end the history lesson here so we can discuss how these things have impacted people's ability still today to have economic mobility. And just before, I want to talk just a little bit around some of the current practices and policies that's really just preserving the divide that we see today. So there is a widespread misconception that the problem is based on the difference of income, but it's really much deeper than that. When we look at wealth, which is the financial capital families need to expand their economic opportunity and agency, the disparity is even larger. So wealth is the value of all your assets owned minus your debts. And income reflects how much money you make each year. But if you spend more than what you make, or whether or not if you have high income or low, your wealth could be zero or even negative, meaning you are in debt. So this slide shows data from the US Census Bureau in 2014, and it shows how the median household wealth for income quintile and race. And I want to draw your attention to where all three races are at least making the lowest range considered for middle class. And at that level, we see that African-American families was at 49,500, Latinos 45,720 compared to 159,570 for whites. So we truly have to consider the impact of the wealth gap as we're considering economic mobility for communities of color. And by 2045, it is estimated that households of color will represent a majority of the US population. So if unaddressed, the racial wealth divide will just continue to limit our ability to create an inclusive economy that works for us all. And education is not the great equalizer. Again, this is a myth, not the reality for communities of color. Instead, education is a tool to help families of color to advance out of poverty. But it has not yet proven to be a wealth builder for communities of color. The US Census in this chart reveals that white households with a bachelor's degree are more than 3 times as wealthy as Black and Latino households with the same degree attainment. And whites with a GED have a median household wealth of $64,200, which is double the wealth of a Latino or Black with a 4-year degree. And as stark as all these findings are, we have to remember that the racial wealth divide is not a natural phenomenon. Rather, it is a natural result of public policies throughout our history that have either purposely or thoughtlessly designed to widen the economic gap between white households and households of color, and between the wealthy and everyone else. And so if we're going to be able to tackle this head on, then we're going to need to leverage existing policies and systems from education, social services to entrepreneurship that can build up the economic standing and wealth building potential for low wealth households of color, while also creating new policies and systems that do the same. And lastly, these are just a few current other policies that I just want to name that also needs to be considered. The saving penalties for public assistance, the criminal justice system's role in financial security, the upside down tax code, mortgage rate disparities, as well as student loan debts, all things that are impacting communities of color. So now I'm going to switch gear and we're going to talk a little bit around just some of the key data points for the racial wealth divide in Seattle. The Seattle profile was released earlier this year and is available with the meeting materials, and we will also provide a link to it in the chat. I do want to acknowledge that nonprofit intervention is not enough to bridge the racial wealth divide, but we do believe it's important to strengthen the work of these organizations for the communities that need them most, the ones that they really trust. And so this report is really meant to be a conversation starter. It's used to be an advocacy tool for leaders and stakeholders and partners in Seattle. It also should be used as a way to educate people and also a way to amplify the lived experiences of communities of color. What we can see with the data is that Seattle is majority white at 65%, followed by Asians, 15% of the demographics, Black and Latinos both at 7%, Native American at 0.5%, and 5.5% for other. We also note that households of color, the level of households of color living in liquid asset poverty is 41%. And that is the percentage of households that don't have 3 months of assets to survive in the absence of income. And this is something that became a reality for far too many families during the pandemic. So we know that this number has probably increased. And we also want to note on this slide that Blacks have the largest percentage of households with zero net worth, which is at 33.1%. Data shows that the median household income for white residents in Seattle was 3 times that of Native American residents and over 2 times more than Black residents. And Native Americans are the largest group that are uninsured. Again, another major factor during the COVID pandemic. Seattle has been experiencing rising housing costs, which has led to increased homelessness and some residents even being pushed out of the city. We see that 2 in 3 Black and Native American renters are cost burdened. And we also see that whites have the largest homeownership rate at 50.9%, followed by Asian Americans at 43.2%, Native Americans at 29.2%, Latinos at 26.5%, and Blacks at 25.8%. Black workers are 3 times more likely to be unemployed than white workers. And we also see that the average white-owned business is about 12 times the value of the average Black-owned business. These are definitely some data points that I think can help drive the conversations that we need to have. And so the racial wealth divide profiles are a key resource that are created in our cities that we really use to help our leaders in the communities that they're in to raise awareness around the important issues and provide data on the racial economic equity indicators. And they are all available on Prosperity Now website under the Building High Impact for Nonprofits of Color page. And I just do want to remind people that our partners on the ground, again, they're working to address all these disparities, and we will listen to how they are approaching these strategies throughout our time today. So now I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I am going to transition us into our first session. Which is Policy in Action. So advocacy work by nonprofits requires a deep collaboration and understanding of structures and histories in the cities and communities they work in. High impact nonprofits recognize the power in policy and advocacy building and work to ensure that voices in their communities they serve reach policymakers. So in Seattle, our Building High Impact for Nonprofits of Color leaders are keenly aware of the policies that would impact their communities most and see value in giving residents a platform to inform these solutions. While there's no one size fits all for policy and advocacy efforts, we will be exploring some strategies by Seattle-based groups that are pushing the needle on racial economic equity in the city We will hear one example in a TED Talk style presentation to learn how best to center community voice in your efforts and to learn the role different stakeholders can play in being accountable to their community. Advocacy requires action, regardless if you're a nonprofit practitioner, policymaker, community member, or other stakeholder. We want you to be engaged in this conversation, to take part in a real-time ideation, and to learn what policy and advocacy measures can be leveraged to address the growing racial wealth divide in Seattle. With that, let me introduce our first TED Talk presenter, Isaac Joy, president of King County Now. He will be followed by Nakia Winfield with Liberating Structures, who will help facilitate some breakouts and some thoughtful discussions. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for that introduction, Ebony, and for setting the context. Much appreciated, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. My name is Isaac Joy. I'm a brother to 9 siblings, uncle to countless nieces and nephews, a son, partner to dear Mardungo. I'm also a native Seattleite and a founder and president of King County Equity Now. King County Equity Now is based on a theory of racial realism. Racial realism is a term coined by Harvard Law professor Derek Bell, the first tenured Black Harvard Law professor. And he basically coined the term to capture that American society and its legal structure will never allow for Black people to gain full equality in this country. Bell wanted to dispel the myth that American society would slowly build towards a more just, equal place for Blacks. He basically said, if you look at all the data, there's no magical moment in the future where Blacks and whites are equal. The mythical year 2200, for example, when MLK's dream finally manifests, just never happens. And I think when Bell was speaking about racial realism, to a lot of the facts that Ebony was elevating originally in this call, Bell was saying to understand racial realism, you really have to understand the strength of anti-Black racism in America. Again, Ebony highlighted a number of facts. They're talking about how wealth was created and history of slavery, and I'll just add a couple more. In the 1800s, the enslaved represented, 20% of the US population, 40% in the South. However, the market value of those that were enslaved between 1780s and 1850 was approximately 1.5 times all of US national income, or approximately the same value of all US farmland. So when you talk about, plantation slavery, it was, one of, if not the largest industries in the United States, developing huge amounts of wealth, not only in terms of the folks that were enslaved, but in terms of the industries built off of it. And so in order for an industry to be that large and to be the engine of our country, and for this industry to be so cruel and built on domination and violence of particular people, there needed to be a theory. And so you have an industry that's the industry of the country built on violence, built on dominance, built on hatred, built on these extremes, in a country whose political, ideas are of, elevating, espousing individual freedom. So there's this very strong contrast, this incredible contrast. And in order to reconcile that contrast, in order to make sense of it, there needed to be a theory to kind of close that gap. And that theory was anti-Black racism. And so if you look in the US, anti-Black racism really is, I would argue one of, if not the defining theories of this country. And so Bell was speaking to that when he was putting up his theory of racial realism. And we talked to things about, you know, in the 1800s to 1930, there was an extrajudicial lynching in the South every 4 days. So every 4 days, there'd be a Black person that would be hung outside of the judicial system. And that's just speaking to, again, the strength of this religion, this anti-Black racism. These lynchings would draw crowds, often sometimes 20,000 people. People would bring their families, people would bring spectators. So, you know, anti-Black racism, if you look at education, if you look at, demographics for where people live, if you look at health, et cetera, the through line through so much of America's trends is anti-Black racism. And so Bell was speaking to that when he was saying basically to the Black population, we have to be real with the fact that this country will not allow Black people ever to be equal. And so I was wrestling with this theory of racial realism while in law school. And at the same time, while I was in law school, a study came out, and I should actually go look back to see if Prosperity Now was a part of it. But a study came out in Boston talking about Black wealth, and it was basically Black wealth. I believe the article at the time was basically zero. The average wealth in Boston for a Boston family, I think, was 250,000. And it animated this conversation in Boston of whether or not Boston was a racist city. And that's, for folks that have been or spent time in Boston, that's a conversation that comes up often for that city. Boston, historically, again, it's this place of extreme contrast. Its history to some of the most progressive movements, but has, by and large, one of the most racist histories as a city. And so, but again, likes to think of itself, I think, as a progressive, progressive bastion in Western democracy. And so when this article came out that wealth was zero, Black wealth was zero in Boston, it really startled a lot of people. And it reignited this conversation. Is racism, is Boston a racist city? And I think the important part for me about that article was two things. One, that article absolutely reinforced racial realism. And I think the great work that Prosperity Now and others have done to really elevate wealth as a central metric in understanding the conditions of Black people has been very helpful. The road to zero, the other pieces that have been put out that basically state that Black wealth is on a path to zero at 2050, I think really hones in on, cuts through the fat through this conversation. But a lot of the conversation about racism at that time in Boston, when people were saying, is it or is it not a racist city, they were focusing on social attitudes and kind of social preferences and what does it feel like in the city. And, most people, they didn't have the far and large backlash was, no, it's not a racist city, or they were kind of appalled by these underlying material conditions, this gap. But there was a real disconnect from people's understanding of where we're at in society today from perhaps, social norm standpoint to the actual underlying conditions of what Black people face. People think that we've progressed a lot further than we have. And this sense of, and not just that we progressed a lot further than we have, there's also this underlying sense that even if we haven't progressed further, that we're still on a path towards equity. And I think that's really important to just sit on, that a lot of people find reprieve by saying that, okay, things aren't right now. They might acknowledge that things aren't fair, things aren't just, but they take some solace in this idea, in this myth that we're on a path, we're closing the gap. We're slowly closing the gap. So I can feel solace that it's not good now, but 10, 20, 30, 40 years, maybe for my kids, it will be better. And that article, that experience in Boston, taking, a lot of other things that were happening at that time really pushed me to delve really deep into racial realism and struggle with what Bell was trying to lift up, which is just this idea that Blacks may never, ever achieve equity or equality in the US, and what are the implications of that, and what does that mean? Fast forward to post-law school, really believing in taking racial realism as a fundamental principle. You know, I'm a native Seattleite, coming back to Seattle, looking at organizations that were really accountable to the Black community and pushing on um, uh, equity solutions that have the chance at disrupting racial realism led me to Africatown Community Land Trust. For those that don't know, I think Africatown Community Land Trust is really a national leader in anti-gentrification work. It's one of the organizations in Washington State that has one of the most authentic, organic, accountable relationships to a large Black population, and can trace really its history to decades of Black organizing. And it was with and during my role as a board member with Africatown, and trying to push a lot of the solutions that Africatown was lifting up, that a couple things added to this theory of racial realism. One was that often there was a real disconnect between Black organizations. So at Africatown, there was a disconnect between organizations that had an authentic, organic, accountable connection to Black community and the platform that they were given. So as stated, Africatown is incredibly connected, had this large organic base and activism history into the Central District. And yet its platform and its visibility did not in any way reflect its accountability and the Black community kind of behind it. So when we're talking about racial realism and why is it that Black wealth is on a path to zero, why is it that Bell was saying that Black people will never reach equality or equity? Well, it's because it's not just this overarching, it's a lot of things, but it's accumulation of a lot of individual decisions. And so I think at Africatown became very apparent that you could be authentically connected to the Black community. You could have the biggest Black base. You could, and that wouldn't necessarily matter in terms of your elevation or platform or be able to speak on issues. So that was one big takeaway. Another big takeaway at Africatown was this relationship again between being accountable and being connected to a community, and the terms of solutions that you're putting forward. So one of the things that really attracted me about Africatown was the size and scale of the solutions that they offered. The types of projects that I personally want to be in, I want to be a part of projects that have a chance at disrupting racial realism. I do not want to accept that Black people will forever, in 100, 200 years, be in the same position. And so Africatown was lifting up and was crafting solutions, large-scale solutions that, if followed, would truly bring about thriving, be game-changing for our Black community locally. And I want to highlight that relationship. I think that relationship between being organically and accountably connected to the Black community and the types of solutions that you offer, I think is a direct correlation, in part because when you are close in proximity and accountable to the pain and the injustice that the Black community feels, there's a sense of urgency that's lifted up in the types of solutions that you're bringing forward. And so we were putting forward solutions like $1 billion land acquisition fund in Seattle to support the Black community acquire and develop land so that it can thrive. So fast forward, I guess one of the lessons that, finally a lesson that we learned at Africatown Community Land Trust as well, was that throughout the city, there were kind of these pockets of accountable Black organizations that were really working hard and tirelessly to elevate solutions that could really be game changing. And that a lot of these organizations were gatekept out of conversations, were not adequately funded, were not lifted up, or didn't have the kind of platform. And so it was kind of a David and Goliath scenario. We saw that there were multiple battles kind of taking place across the city where, you know, there's this David versus this Goliath. And so there was this idea that, you know, there was the idea to harness, bring the Davids together collectively, organize ourselves, and try to harness Black community organizing power for large-scale pro-Black wins. And that led and birthed into King County Equity Now, which was officially formed in 2020. King County Equity Now is a pro-Black policy and advocacy institute elevating equity solutions that can disrupt racial realism for the Black community in Washington State. It was built around this idea to disrupt racial realism, and also built around the idea to bring together, trying to harness the collective power of Black community organizing, and bring folks together around line up different obstacles and different opportunities so that we can collectively go after those opportunities in unison and start stacking up our wins. And in a very short amount of time period, very proud to say that we've done collectively as a community some really tremendous things. In less than 2 years, we brought in hundreds of millions of dollars into the Black community through our advocacy. You know, we supported the transition and the transfer of multiple land projects, including supporting and transferring Fire Station 6 into the William Grove Center for Cultural Innovation. We've supported the stopping of a full block of predatory development in the heart of the Central District, Seattle's historically Black neighborhood, bringing tens of thousands of community members together to stop the market rate development of a full block. And now that full block has been transferred over to a Black organization to develop and be the first ever in-state Black-led, Black-owned homeless shelter service provider in the state. We know that Black people are completely over-indexed in being homeless, yet there's no provider of scale that's Black-owned and Black-controlled. It's a tremendous problem, not just within homelessness, across the nonprofit industry. So that's a major win. We've held events that have brought together an estimated over 200,000 people together. We mobilized thousands of people in a campaign against the Washington State Housing and Finance Commission, which allocates tremendous amount of funding for affordable housing. In 2021, their original allocation featured zero funding for Black-owned or Black-led projects. We helped support a large-scale advocacy campaign, and they changed their tune. They invested $27 million in African Plaza, supported Ethiopian Village, supported Elizabeth Family Homes, and others. We were a large engine in harnessing community power for reallocating money from the Seattle Police Department budget. It was the first time in decades that the police department budget was reduced. I believe 300 police officers left the department, including some of the most racist police officers. And then, yeah, we've gotten to the point, you know, when we say hundreds of millions, we are a 501c4. So there were not really any sustained kind of Black lobbying presence in the state. And so we are a lobbying agency that can take community organizing power and funnel that up at the city, county, and state level into policy. Again, our mission and our focus is to pro-Black policy that can create and disrupt racial realism in a short time period. We are focused on right now developing, which is, this is very on point in terms of the focus prosperity now, but we're working with national and local thought leaders in terms of to close the Black wealth divide in Washington State. So we're developing policy and partners that we can champion, that we can partner with throughout 2022, 2023, to develop policy that to close the wealth divide, which will hinge largely on homeownership programs, and it'll touch on every single system that is material to Black people. So education, health, the criminal system, et cetera. And so, yeah, with that, I think it's been, King County Equity Now is proven that I think there are key ways to disrupt racial realism. I think there are key ways to ensure that the Black community can build wealth, that the Black community can build power. And I think it starts with centering accountable Black community organizations. It centers with, I think, all organizations that are playing in this space, putting out solutions and putting out plans that explicitly acknowledge a purpose of trying to disrupt racial realism. So they say, if we're an organization, I'm putting out a plan and I can chart to you, if my plan is completed, what is the outcome of this plan going to be? And the outcome of this plan is going to be, building power for Black people. We can track it, we can see it. I think too often we're putting out plans or putting out solutions that are piecemeal, that don't speak to this larger issue and don't try to really address building Black power. And I think when you elevate organizations and people in the Black community that are accountable to the community, that naturally will help solve that issue, because again, their proximity to the injustice, their proximity to their urgency. So I think I'm very excited about this meeting, very excited about the work that Prosperity Now is doing and the partners that are here. I'm excited to learn from each other, and excited to hopefully also bring critical capital into these organizations that are really doing fantastic work. And again, doing this work underfunded, under-resourced, financially resourced. We're resourced in human capital in a lot of other ways, but the more attention that we can put to it, and the more that we can collectively put our heads together to really say, in a 5, 10, 15-year horizon, we want to close the wealth divide. We want to close homeownership rates. We want to close matriculation rates by 2035, by 2030. I think if we start framing the problem to its appropriate scale, we'll start coming up with solutions that are adequate to solve it. So thank you.
Ooh, Isaac, that was so much and so real, right? Just very much a lot of information, right? We've gotten a lot of information from everyone today. Hi, my name is Nikia. I am here to help facilitate a couple of sections so that we can have some good conversation around what just happened. So Isaac has given us a lot to work with. We wanted to just be able to reflect on those things that he has given us, right? A lot of times we get a whole lot of information and we just got to switch and go to the next thing, but we wanted to allow some time for reflection. So for this particular activity, you're going to need a pen and a paper. So something to write with and something to write on. Also, it's something where it's just gonna be a project that we're doing by ourselves. We're not gonna have to engage with other folks. And we'll just be able to reflect on what it is that Isaac was telling us. So once you have a pen and paper, I want you to grab that piece of paper. You can kind of see it. And I want you to just fold it in quarters. So you're going to fold it in half like this. And I want you to fold it in half again. So you're just going to end up with a piece of paper like this. It's very easy. And then I want you to unfold it, and there's 4 different sections. These are different quadrants. And then there's this little spot in the middle, right? So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Everybody's having screen share issues today. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a thing called a spiral journal. You're already seeing the prompts. So a spiral journal is just going to get us grounded in what he just talked about, right? So just going to fold that piece of paper. We're going to have you draw a spiral. I'm going to give you a minute. Just draw a spiral as tight as you possibly can, a small, tight spiral. And I'm going to give you a minute. Just be real careful with it. And then we'll go through some questions for each quadrant. So just a minute of drawing a spiral right in the center of the page. Just going real slow, trying not to let those lines touch. And as you're finishing up that last circle, that last go round, I'm gonna invite you to think about and respond to some prompts. So you're gonna have 1 prompt per quadrant. Just answer or give as many answers as you can for each one. So what resonated with you and what Isaac just said? What felt true? What was something that you're like, ooh, I feel this in my heart. I see this, I know this. What are some of the things that resonated with you? And just put as many as you want to in that first quadrant. You're going to have a minute. And as you're finishing up that last thought, I want you to move into a second quadrant. And in that quadrant, I want you to reflect on what surprised you. What is something where you're like, ooh, I knew it was like that, but I didn't know it was like that. What did you learn from the things that he provided you today? Think about going ahead and wrapping up your last words or thoughts, the last phrases on that one. And then on the third quadrant, you know the drill. The question is, what's missing from this conversation? Isaac gave us a whole lot of information, right? But he can't cover everything. What's a piece that you know that wasn't included in this conversation? What's something that's missing from this conversation that is already very deep? This is not a critique. This is just saying he didn't get a chance to touch on it. I feel like he could talk for 3 years and still not get to all the anti-Blackness in the US. So. Go ahead and wrap those thoughts up. And lastly, where could your skills or expertise assist with this issue? Where can your skills and expertise help this issue? Where do your skills and expertise intersect with this issue? What does that look like? Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and I'm going to give you a minute to just look over what you've written. Just what are some things that stand out to you? What are patterns that you see? What feels really good? What's surprising you in what you've written? Just take a look at what you've written. Okay. So now that you've been able to take a look at what you've written, for timing purposes, we're gonna just ask you to write some of the things that you feel like you want to share with other folks in chat. So I want you to write it in chat. I'm gonna give you a minute, but I don't want you to hit enter. So type out, like, what are the things that you're coming away with? What are the things that you want to share with the rest of the room? What are the things that really stand out to you, or you feel like this is something I'm carrying with me from this? Just type that in chat, and I'm gonna give you 1 minute to type that in there, and just don't hit enter, and we'll hit enter all at the same time. Also, this always happens, at least one person's gonna hit enter early. So just go ahead and know that that's there, and you might be the one. Okay, hit enter. Yeah, see, some of y'all are still typing, that's cool. So yeah, how do we address anti-Black racism in the context of a larger system of racism against other people? right? How are we a part of a multi-pronged approach to oppression, right? Sharing the stories of those in work and those most affected by it. How is the average person able to help or can advocate? There's so far to go, right? We have a major economic problem and the data reflects that. Yes, all of these things are beautiful, absolutely. So with that, I want to go ahead and pass it to Triana. I really appreciate y'all sharing your thoughts with us. And we'll have some time for you to talk with each other about it and have some co-created ideation in one of the next sections.
Thank you so much, Nakia, and thank you, Ebony and Isaac, and everybody for being here. Appreciate all of you guys' presence. And just quickly, I want to be able to frame this up. I mean, what does this actually mean? How do we use all of this information and move forward? So much of this is really what you guys are expressing in the chat, that it takes us all. And so I just encourage everyone to find a way to get engaged and get involved. And, you may be doing some work on your own right now in terms of your business or your brand or, an organization you work with or your individual effort. But when we start understanding the need for all of us to be able to engage our elected officials in these issues, to speak out when we actually see racism playing out in front of us in different examples, whether that's in the workplace or at school or in the grocery store or in your neighborhood. I think it's important that we all find a way to utilize our energy to move it forward. And as Isaac was saying, right now there is a need for big scale solutions, and those big scale solutions are going to make the status quo of this antiquated system that is built on anti-Blackness very uncomfortable. And this is why it takes a wide variety of voices for people to say, you know what, no, enough is enough. It's not just going to happen with Black advocates and those who are the most affected by these issues and anti-Blackness. It needs to be the voice of everyone saying, in order for us to have a great country that we know we can have, we've never really seen it. But when we think about the future and what we can do, I think it's important that everybody find ways to get engaged. And because this is about policy and advocacy in this session, I really want you to all be able to walk away with a couple of things that you can be doing to engage your elected officials in your county, in your state, in your city, in your district. Find a way to engage them in the solutions that are going to really eliminate the wealth divide. Thanks so much for listening, you guys.
Okay. Ooh, I don't know if my screen is froze, but we're going to try that conversation this time, right? So back again, unless Ebony, is there anything that you wanted to add? Okay, great. So what's going to happen now is y'all are actually going to be able to have that conversation. So not only what resonated with you before, but what are the issues that are happening in Kings County that have been lifted up? How are we able to go about making moves on this? So we're going to do a thing called a conversation cafe. And I'm going to share my screen again, so y'all can see what I'm talking about. And actually, Madeline, can you set up the breakout rooms for this? I thought I was going to have a little bit more time. If you can't, that's totally fine. I'm going to explain it, and then I'll just take a little extra minute to get these folks all set. Are y'all able to see my screen? Yes, okay, great. So yes, we're gonna do a thing called Conversation Cafe. And this is just something that where you can listen and reflect together on shared ideas, right? On shared challenges. So again, my name is Nakia. These structures that I'm having you go through are something called liberating structures. And liberating structures, the idea is that you can have a better conversation that is more dynamic, that is more generative, that is more honest and engaging than the normal conversation that you would have. So we structure things based on time and participation. So you're going to have some prompts. These are called invitations, right? We want you to be thinking about how are you leveraging your network and capital to be groundbreaking and equitable. And what would you like to see happen that currently isn't? What role do you want to play to see this change? Right? So in this conversation cafe, we're going to put you in groups of about 5. And what's going to happen is we want you to determine a host. So whoever gets in there, we want you to be able to figure out who's going to host this session. So a host just has to make sure that we're all following the 6 agreements, which I'll share on the next page. So following the 6 agreements is just going to be real easy. It's mostly about how we're engaging. But the host is just going to not, whip us in the shape, but like just sort of make sure that we're getting a chance for everybody to talk in a non-judgmental way, right? So there's going to be a first round. So that first round, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. So you're going to be in a group with, again, like around 5 people, depending on how many folks we've got in the room, right? In our entire summit today. It might not divide evenly. But each person is going to have a chance to share their perspective on the question or on the topic. Everybody gets a chance to contribute. They can pass if they want to, but they have to be able to have the option to contribute. And that'll be 5 minutes. And so normally this is done with a speaking piece, but we don't want to do that kind of appropriation here. So just make sure that everybody has that time to speak. And then round 2, we're going to follow up on anything that was said in the first round. So we might have to elaborate on something. More things might be coming into our heads around, oh, I forgot to say this, or like this is something that you reminded me of when you were speaking, right? And just be able to have that second round. And then we'll just have an open, free-flowing discussion for 15 minutes. And then after that 15 minutes, which seems like it's a lot of time, I promise you it is not. After that 15 minutes, we want to go ahead and have people give closing thoughts. So you're going to have 1 minute per person, again, to tell for each person to tell you what they're taking away from that conversation. During this time, we will go ahead and send you breakout messages saying, hey, you've done with round 1, go ahead and get to round 2. We'll let you know when round 3 is over and to move into round 4 before we bring you back to the main session. Please be on the lookout for those messages because otherwise it's really hard to see. If you're not looking out for them, you might miss them. So we will also ask you to hold your own time in the rooms. So the 6 agreements that we are going to ask you to abide by are suspending judgment as best you can, respecting one another, seeking to understand rather than persuade, inviting and honoring diverse opinions, speaking for what has personal heart and meaning, and going for honesty and depth without going on and on and on. So that's the one that most people who are the hosts are the ones that are really trying to shore people up on. So a lot of this can be really meaningful, and also people can get verbose, but we want to make sure that you have time to hear everybody speak. Okay. So again, the 2 prompts are going to be, how are you leveraging your networking capital to be groundbreaking and equitable? And what would you like to see happen that currently isn't? What role do you want to play to see this change? So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And I'm going to ask Madeline to just let me know if she was able to make the rooms or if I need to do that. And then we're going to get y'all into some breakout rooms. Does anybody have questions? Okay, great. Before we get you into these rooms, I am going to give you I want to give you those prompts in chat so you'll be able to have them and see them immediately. So just give me one moment and I will throw those in chat so that you'll be able to make sure that you know what you're doing once you get into those rooms. y'all. Normally my computer is doing something a little bit faster than it's doing right now. So I will tell you that there's a thing in liberating structures called confusiasm. And that is when tech does not do the things that you want it to do, and is holding up the system. And that's a little bit about what's happening right now. So one, here are the 6 agreements. Yes, kind of like local government, where lots of things are happening and you're like, oh, I thought we had this. Here is the process. And then here are the prompts. Okay. Madeline, let's get them into rooms, please. And thank you. I told you, I was like, you're gonna have 15 minutes, and it's not even 15 minutes. It doesn't feel like 15 minutes. It feels like it's real fast. So hopefully y'all got to have at least the beginning parts of some really deep and excellent conversations. And I'm sorry you didn't get enough time, but hopefully y'all will be able to have some time at a later point to be able to continue those. We do want to hear some of your amazing thoughts though. So what we did earlier is we'll call it a chatterfall. So we want to do that again so that whatever takeaways, whatever like brilliant moments, gems, aha moments, stuff like that, things you didn't even get a chance to finish, anything like that, go ahead and put it in chat, but don't hit enter. So I'm going to give you a minute to try to attempt to finish your conversations on chat, but don't hit enter, and we'll hit enter all at the same time and see all these beautiful thoughts. Okay, go ahead and hit enter. Both and community-based systems and change, yes. How we're using our respective positions of influence or power to disrupt the ideas that it's too big a task to take on as steeped in thinking of the past. We can move these needles forward in all sectors by tapping the trip tab of all the boats in the water. Yes, being mindful of the responsibility that comes with holding a gatekeeping position, hello, and really digging into what voices, information, messages I choose to amplify or not. No amount of racism is so big and strong that I cannot be deconstructed. Both and community-based systems and solutions and systems change. Continuing the uncomfortable conversation and being inclusive to all stakeholders to obtain collective action. Don't think you don't have the power to reimagine and work to create this new system. Connections to each other through our work, centering humanity while we disrupt racism, understanding that we have always been leaders for generations. Yes, these are beautiful. It sounds like y'all had some really wonderful conversations, and thank you for sharing out the fruits of that labor, the fruits of that verbal and emotional labor that you put in. So I want to hand it off to Ebony to move on to the next part.
I'm actually going to hand it off to Treyana, who's going to close this section with some call to actions.
Thank you so much, Ebony. Yes, this is exactly what we were just talking about in the breakout session, is that please find ways to be engaged. When we talk about the need for multiple voices of diversity to be involved in the policy and advocacy pieces, creating new legislation, engaging with your elected officials, being sure that you are connected to work that's happening on the ground in any way that you possibly can be. I really thank Lisa for giving me a new vision of tapping the trip tabs on the boats to move these boats in a different direction and really disrupt this system. It is on all of us. And so, this was brought to you by King County Equity Now, the first session. If you guys are looking for, campaigns or advocacy that you want to, hey, click a few buttons on our quorum campaigns and send some information to your elected officials. You can find those at kingcountyequitynow.com. I also encourage you to learn more about these organizations that Ebony brought together with Prosperity Now and the BHINC, Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color. We have so many great groups there that are really connected in this region and are really being intentional on the ground in their efforts to, not just disrupt this system, but to really empower communities. And so please feel free to give them a follow on Instagram. I'm sure all of them have different handles you can follow by searching in the tabs, finding them on Facebook. Just being engaged, I think, is so important. And there's lots of newsletters that you can sign up for at each one of these organizations. Get in contact with them. Find out how you can be a stakeholder in the work that they're doing, because it does take all of us. Thanks so much, you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Treyana, for that wonderful call to action. I'm going to move us along here and talking about the next section of today's summit, and that is philanthropic and corporate funding, addressing the racial wealth divide through equitable funding. My name is Vanna Cure. I am the Associate Director of Advocacy here at Prosperity Now, and I'll just give a brief overview of what this section will be about. So the value of prioritizing nonprofits led by people of color cannot be understated. These leaders are often rooted in the communities they serve and have a deep understanding of the needs, the challenges, and opportunities that will narrow the racial wealth divide. We have some funders that see the importance of supporting and growing BIPOC-led nonprofits for these reasons, but how can these efforts be accelerated and scaled? This session will seek to delve into where in the funding and investment ecosystem we are seeing real change that's addressing the racial wealth gap in the city, and where gaps still exist. These panelists will discuss how are we ensuring that the funding decision makers are rooted in the communities that they serve, and what unique funding models we're seeing here and across the country that are truly responsive to the needs to BIPOC communities. So with that, we'll have some case study models that showcase non-traditional ways to invest in communities of color. First, we will hear from Michael Brown from the Seattle Foundation, followed by one of our very own Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color leaders, Michelle Merriweather from Urban League, to discuss the Black Co-op Fund. So I'll turn it over to Michael Brown at this time.
And sorry, just a correction that we're actually going to not have Michael Brown, but we will be moving on to Michelle Merriweather with the Urban League. Thank you, Vanna.
Thank you, Ebony and Vanna. I appreciate the time and just the opportunity to work and get to know all of you over the last over a year. But here I am kind of in a different capacity to share about the Black Future Co-op Fund. For those of you that don't know me, I am Michelle Merriweather. I have the privilege of leading the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle right now, and come from a long line of warriors. I always often tribute the work that I do now to my grandmothers. One, my paternal grandmother, who put all of her children and some of her nieces and nephews through college by cleaning other people's houses. And then my maternal grandmother, who left Mobile, Alabama on her own with her babies and in the 60s and purchased her own home and was very proud of the fact that she did it on her own without any help from anyone and raised her children. So I attribute the work that we do, and I will tell you that my fellow architects, Angela Jones, Senator Tawana Nobles, and Andrea Capaign, who I believe you'll hear from later, always tribute this work to our warrior ancestors. So I'd like to lead with that. But just over a year ago, when we were all at home doing this work, many of us anyway, across Washington and across the globe, reckoning with the pandemic, we all witnessed the continuous brutality of Black bodies and the uprising that stems from the final straw, the murdering of George Floyd. The four of us came together to kind of figure out what we were going to do. Our brothers and sisters were definitely protesting and making their voices heard. And we're joined by an echo chamber of many other races and communities across the globe. The four of us came together and we wanted to take our stand. And we stood up literally overnight, a by us, for us organization that we went to philanthropy and said we were going to ensure that Black Washingtonians had an opportunity rooted in strength, beauty, and soulfulness of Blackness. We launched the Black Future Co-op Fund. Sorry, I'm trying to just, and so with that, we envisioned Washington, we set a vision for Washington as a place where all Black people are liberated, prosperous, and self-determined to fully live our lives. And to accomplish this, we focus strategically in three areas. One, confronting anti-Blackness unapologetically. Two, reckoning with the philanthropic redlining that's happening throughout Washington and throughout this country for generations. And third, to build Black generational health, wealth, and well-being, and increasing prosperous outcomes in all areas of Black lives. What we know is that Black people have long been contributors to Washington communities and the growth of our economy in all areas, especially in Washington and aerospace and maritime industries. And we have undeniably innovated and driven popular culture that has local, national, and global impact. Yet anti-Black racism has purposely and persistently undermined the opportunity for Black people to build wealth over generations. Decades upon decades of discriminatory policies and the systemic devaluing of Black lives have perpetrated unequal and adverse outcomes for Black people. And we also know that for generations, Black-led organizations have purposely been under-resourced. It sounds like y'all were talking about that earlier. And since its inception in the early 20th century, philanthropy has been based on a lopsided power dynamic where donors decide where, when, and how they want to give away funds. Philanthropy traditionally lends on white CEOs, white boards, white staff to make decisions about investments in Black communities and communities of color. We also know that 92% of foundation presidents, 85% of boards, and majority of staffs of the foundations are also white. And as a result, philanthropy overinvests in white-led organizations, under-resources Black-led organizations, and white-led organization revenues are 76% higher than Black-led organizations. 1.8%, 1.8%, less than 2% of philanthropy invest in Black communities. And that's why the Co-op Fund, the Black Future Co-op Fund, matters so much for all of us. We are by and for Black Washingtonians across Washington's 39 counties. Black people, US born immigrants, refugees, represent diverse backgrounds and experiences, and we are forging a way for all of us to have new pathways to self-determination. Every single Black Washingtonian. As a Black collective, we aim to define for ourselves, speak for ourselves, and create for ourselves a new model of philanthropy that uplifts Black folks and communities throughout the state. And here's a little bit about how we're working to build a liberated future for Black Washingtonians. We know Black Washingtonians are essential to shaping our state's collective future. We are focused on 4 primary areas of impact: promoting a truthful narrative of Black people, connecting communities for collective power, investing in Black-led solutions for generational prosperity, and shifting the paradigm of philanthropy. And how we've done it in the past, this past May, on the anniversary of our 1-year anniversary, as well as the murder of George Floyd, we announced a $1 million investment and grants to 40 organizations across Washington. We are calling these grants the We See You grants, to acknowledge the critical work each organization does every single day on behalf of Black Washingtonians. Grant recipients are Black-led organizations throughout Washington state that are furthering Black liberation. They're providing culturally supportive education and youth mentoring, powering economic mobility through workforce development and training, advancing civil rights, supporting healing from racial trauma through creative arts and cultural programs, and so much more. These grants were made barrier-free. There were no stringent application, no qualification process. We were breaking down obstacles to accessing the needed resources. And the grants were general operational support, so they can, the organizations can do what they see fit to furthering their mission and work. And the We See You grants were just one example of what equitable funding looks like: trusting in Black people, that we know what we need, centering Black voices and experiences, and being intentional about creating access to opportunity. So what are the lessons for in this work for our funders? They're tied to the same guiding principles that I shared earlier of the Black Future Co-op Fund. Remember this: to address the racial wealth divide and build a liberated future for Black Washingtonians, we have to do 3 things. 1, confront anti-Blackness, go beyond public statements and pledges. They're cute, but we have to be, and somewhat appreciated, but we have to be accountable. We have to call out and dismantle racist systems and structures that have legally disadvantaged Black folks for so long, and design a new one, inclusive of Black folks and Black communities leading the way. 2, we have to reckon with the philanthropic redlining. Deal with it. Funding has to be about reparations unapologetically. It's been 400 years of systemic underinvestment and intentional harm and brutality on Black bodies. And your funding has to be about reparations. And we can't escape from the word or be afraid to use it. And 3rd, investing in building Black generational wealth, health, and well-being. At the beginning of the pandemic and the racial uprising, we saw how quick philanthropy shifted. We suspended burdensome application processes, we increased payouts, we moved money out the door quickly to get it into the hands of those that were doing the tough work. And by intentionally valuing and investing in Black life, we all can generate a shared prosperity. So just a quick call to action as we close. Society right now is being called to change, to disrupt the imbalance of power, and we have to create a liberated future. We can start right here for Black Washingtonians, and we have to stop funding what makes us comfortable and start funding what makes change. So I will stop there. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. All this truth today, right? So we're going to do something similar to what we did last time. Is the idea is that the wisdom is in the room. So we are being provided with truth, and we need to figure out how we are going to process that together, right? In the spirit of organizing. None of us can do this by ourselves. And so how are we working with others and starting that here and modeling that here and now, right? So first, we want to reflect. I'm sure that y'all are shocked. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again, so that we are able to do some quick exercises. So we're gonna do some rapid ideation. So the idea is that we're gonna have some time to reflect by yourself. Then we're gonna have some solution creation, and we're gonna do some peer consulting and trios. So when we reflect by ourselves, I'm going to do something called a 4x4. And the idea is that you are again going to have 4 questions in 4 minutes, and a minute per question to be able to reflect on what's just happened here. I'm not going to make you do the spiral or anything like that, but you do need something to write on and write with. Once we go through that, I'm going to ask you to look over what you've written, and then we're going to start coming up with some solutions based on what we've written. What does this mean? How are we using this? And be able to come up with something called a 15% solution. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms of 3 people and be able to get and give feedback on the solutions that we've created to make sure that they are as effective and as and that will work in the context that we're at, and also maybe be able to be strategic with whoever else is in the room, and how are we partnering these solutions, and so we're not working against other people but with other folks. So again, you need to have something to write with and write on, and we're going to go into that first prompt. Again, you're going to have 1 minute per question, so hopefully y'all are ready and have whatever you need to write with. So the first question is, what are the steps that you specifically are taking to close the racial wealth divide in your organization or community? What's the work that you're doing? I'm going to give you a minute to just write down. For some of that, for us, that's multi-pronged. For some of that, it's really easy to sum up, but what is the work that you're doing to close the racial wealth divide? Okay. I'm going to wrap up your last thought or phrase for that answer. And then the second question is, what prevents you individually or your organization from doing this work all of the time? What prevents you from taking these steps all the time? Okay, and wrap up your last thoughts on that. The third question is, thinking about the successful case study that Michelle just shared with us, what behaviors, practices, or frameworks made their success possible? I want you to think about what Michelle just shared. What are the behaviors, practices, and frameworks that made that success possible? go ahead and start wrapping up your thoughts about those frameworks. And then think about how can you incorporate those successful practices, frameworks, and behavior in your own work to continue closing that wealth divide? How can you use what Michelle, the practices, frameworks, and behavior that Michelle spoke to when describing her success? How can you use those and incorporate those frameworks and practices and behaviors into your own work to continue closing the wealth divide? Okay. Now, I want to give you a minute to dive deep into question 4, right? How are you able to incorporate those successful practices, frameworks, and behavior? We want to look at some solution orientation, right? So I want you to look at the answers that you gave for question 4, and I want you to think about a 15% solution. So a 15% solution isn't something that's solving the issue entirely, right? It's just moving the ball. So if you want to think of this as a football metaphor, like you gotta move the ball a little bit closer to your goal. You're not getting all the way there. We're not talking about a touchdown, right? We know that needs more resources. It needs a whole lot of things. But how are you able to just move the ball a little bit forward, right? What is your 15% solution? A 15% solution is something that you can do right away. You don't need to have any more freedom. You don't need resources, permission, authority, or control. You can do this right now, right? Whether it's talking to somebody on the way home from work, whether it's changing the processes that you have in your office. What is a 15% solution? Something where you have discretion to act right now. And I want you to take that framework and I want you to look at the ideas that you generated in that 4th prompt. And I want you to come up with a list of 15% solutions. So I'm gonna give you 3 minutes to look at that and look at those solutions and create those solutions. Got about a minute left. in these last 30 seconds. If you feel like you've come up with a nice long list, feel free to start honing some of the things that you've got on there. Okay, go ahead and start wrapping up. Now, hopefully you have a list of solutions that you can use in your work, in your community, in your area, and places that you have influence. So it's a very specific list that is specific to you, right? But what we want you to do right now is get a little bit of feedback, right? We want you to give and get feedback on the solutions that your compatriots in this room have created, right? We want to make sure that that solution that you come up with is the best one that you can take, that you've been able to think about kind of all the things that are happening in your solutions in your area. So pick just one or two of them that you want to be able to give and get feedback about. And then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. So for this peer consulting, what we're going to do is we're going to be in trios. So we're going to put you in breakout rooms. And the first thing you need to do is decide who goes first. Whoever goes first is the client. So the first round, or the first step, you're going to describe your 15% solution. Let us know what the context is, the challenges that you see in implementing it, all of those things. You want to take 1 minute. You got to go fast, right? In the next 2 minutes, the other two people who are in the room with you, the consultants, they're going to ask you clarifying questions. Hey, what did you mean by this? Like, is this what's happening over here? Do you have anybody to do X, Y, and Z with you? Like all of those questions that they need to be able to better understand your solution, why you came up with it, and the context around it, okay? In step 3, what I want to happen is the client is going to turn off your camera so they can't see your reactions, go on mute, they can't hear you being like, oh, no, right? So like turn off all your camera, turn off your sound. And the two consultants, the other two people who are in the room with you are going to talk to each other about the suggestions that they might have, how effective they think that this might be, or ways to reframe your challenge and to reframe what's happening to be able to best hone that solution that you came up with. They'll do that for about 4 minutes. And after that 4 minutes, the client, you're going to turn your camera back on and your mic back on. And you're going to say, thank you for holding my problem, right? For like helping me with this. And then let them know how that worked out for you. Like, oh, that's a really good idea. These are some things that you might follow up on, or some things that you hadn't thought about yet, right? And then you're going to go to the next person. So you've got 3 people, you'll have 3 rounds, and each person will be able to get a consultation, and it should be about 8 minutes per round. Everybody got that? Probably not. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to put this in chat so that you all understand what the steps are once you get into your breakout rooms. So what we'll do is once you're in your breakout rooms, we will give you the breakout messages for that first minute. We'll let you give you a minute to introduce yourself. We'll tell you which steps you need to be at for the first round. But for the second and third rounds, we're going to trust you to hold your own space and to be able to keep track of that time. So you'll get lots of messages that first round telling you where you're at. But then when it comes to the second round, we'll assume that you have a little bit more understanding of how it's supposed to go and let you hold your own time. And you can always go back to chat and see how much time each spot has. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions? All right. Madeline, can we get them into their rooms, please? Oh, there we go. Everybody's coming back now. Great. Hopefully y'all had some good conversations. We'd like to know what your 15% solutions are. Oh, thank you. We'd like to know what your 15% solutions are. So if you want to go ahead and one more time do this chatterfall. So I'm going to give you a minute so that you can write your things in the chat, but then don't hit enter. I got 10 seconds left. All right, go ahead and hit enter. Being more strategic, help shift in mindsets, creating specific teams. Focusing on curating research centered on equity and financial empowerment. Engage grant makers towards more systemic solutions. Changing how and who we fund. Yes, right there, just real easy. Yeah, these are really good. We wanted you to be able to have some steps forward as we go through this process. We don't want you to just be thinking about things, but we want you to have concrete steps that you're able to take, right? Using an inside-out view instead of outside when writing grants, utilizing your relationships to model for other white colleagues, simplifying the process. Don't overthink a process. Yes, all of these things, right? And hopefully you were able to have some good conversations around the things that you were holding and be able to now have met some folks that you're like, oh, this lens was helpful. I might go back to you if I have an issue, right? Because again, the idea here is that the wisdom is in the room. Like these communities, y'all are in community, y'all already have the expertise that you need to succeed, right? The idea is that we are able to together be stronger than we are apart. And so how are we able to continue to lean on each other in order to move forward? So I'm gonna throw in chat real quick. This is just the link to the slides that we used today. And so if you wanna be using those at any other point, you're welcome to do so. There's a little link in the slides to Liberating Structures, which is the actual site for all of the structures that we use today. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and my contact information is on the back. So I'm gonna pass it over to Ebony. Thank you.
Thank you. So I know we have been on here for a little bit. So for those who have been hanging in with us for the entire time, we want to just give you 5 minutes. I know it's not a lot, but we're going to get right back to it. But we're going to give folks 5 minutes. So if you can come back at, it's one time of it. And I'm sorry, I'm on Eastern time, so it's 1:58 my time. So 3 minutes after the hour, and we will pick right back up, and we will have our last session, which is on effective cross-sector collaboration. Thank you. 5-minute pause to recording. All right, welcome back, everyone. So we are down to our last session today, which is on effective collaboration. And so just to give us a quick insight into why this is so important to everything that we've been speaking about today. Collaboration among the nonprofit sector is so vital to the creation of vibrant communities. And yet sustaining collaboration relationships is one of the hardest intangibles to achieve and measure. And so working with others, it really requires some patience, time, and resources that aren't always available, but nonprofit partnerships within the public and private sector continues to be the silver bullet to accomplishing less with just limited resources. So we want to be able to be impactful and have some collective strategies. And in this session, we will have a guided panel discussion around how different coalitions are working together to impact the disparities that we have been speaking about today in Seattle. We will also be able to just unpack some of the roles that trauma, healing, trust, competition, all those good things play when it comes to creating an ecosystem of effective and sustainable collaboration. And so with that, I am going to pass it over to one of our Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color leaders, Annie Hu from Communities Rise, excuse me. She's going to give us a little insight around just what are some of the unique challenges of Seattle. Thank you.
Thanks, Ebony. My name is Annie Hout. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Deputy Director at Communities Rise. We offer pro bono legal services and capacity building support to small businesses and nonprofits led by and serving communities impacted by systemic oppression in Washington State. I'm pleased to introduce our final session today on effective cross-sector collaboration. We know that collaboration between nonprofits and their public and private partners has its challenges, particularly when time and trust and resources are viewed as limited. We also know that more effective collaboration between the people and organizations who are tackling similar issues using different approaches can only strengthen outcomes for communities who are furthest from justice. So in this session, like Ebony said, we're going to have a guided conversation about how effective collaboration can impact cross-sector strategies for closing the racial wealth divide. Today, we'll hear from Celie Savusa, Executive Director of the White Center Community Development Association, Andrea Copain, CEO of Bird Bar Place, and Aine Abbey, CEO of the Tubman Center for Health and Freedom. The panel will be moderated by Aron Garcia, Community Inclusion Manager, also with White Center Community Development Association.
All right. Thank you so much, Annie. Let's give it up for Annie. Let's start using these reaction buttons. I wanna get the energy up. So feel free to give her some claps, some thumbs up. Yes, all right. Really appreciate that. So welcome everyone. My name is Aron Garcia. I work for the White Center Community Development Association. I am truly humbled and really fortunate to be in this space with y'all in front of these chingonas that are about to like lay it down, speak some truth, and really give it to us. Let's get the ball rolling. What how I'd like to start off actually is if you can actually start off with your name, pronouns, the organization that you're doing or you're representing, and why are your ancestors smiling right now? So just give us a little bit about what's going on in your world. And I'll start off with Andrea.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here today. What a powerful stage. Andrea Copain, I'm the CEO of Bird Bar Place, she, her pronouns. And why my ancestors smiling is because they know that I am on a mission to be a good ancestor myself. And they know that because they were carrying a type of communal weight, right, for that generation that then has now become the responsibility of this generation that I proudly take on, even though the work is so challenging. But I'm working and they're smiling so that our descendants, at least 5 generations from now, don't have to be in this work. Thank you.
And is it Ane or Aine?
Aine.
Aine, got you. Thank you.
Yes. Hey, good people. Aine Abbey here with the Tubman Center for Health and Freedom. My preferred gender pronouns are they, them, or she, hers. I'm also from California, so dude also works for me. My ancestors, so my name, Aine, it's Amharic, and it means my eyes, and it's a term of endearment that we say communally, that we see the world through you, that Aine or Ayuni in Arabic, right? And so I think my ancestors, they show me the way. And I'm able to use my skills to communicate and share out our shared vision. And like Andrea said, this is centuries in the making. And so I'm just a conduit, and which leads to our conversation around collaboration. It's all of us. It takes all of us. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And the big boss, Celie Savusa, let's go.
Hi, Aine, it's so nice to meet you. I just had those warm and fuzzy feelings listening to you talk about your name. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
My name's Celie Savusa, and I work with Aron at the White Center CDA as the executive director, as the head gatekeeper in charge. And my pronouns are she, her, and I'm just ready to jump in. Andrea, she's a badass, and so I'm really honored to be here too with these two warriors. So carry on.
Thank you. I'm going to lead off with the first question. I'm going to go ahead and throw it in the chat too. But after hearing the research of today and the challenges lifted up, what do you see as the biggest challenge in addressing racial economic inequalities from your seat? And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pivot to Celia. I know some folks have been jumping in and out, so I want to start off with you.
Yeah, well, I think it was laid out quite eloquently through this whole conference around kind of the challenges and obviously how institutional racism is embedded in everything that we do. For me, is our ability to build relationships gets in the way, and our inability to build relationships. I know as a Samoan woman, our culture itself is built in in how we take care of each other. And so the most important thing that I learned about community work, I learned from my family. And, Andrea talked about how we step on the shoulders of our ancestors and, how do we create spaces like these just to have those kinds of conversations so that humanity finds its way back into our work. And we need to broaden our network, and we need to continue to develop leaders of color to not we need to make sure that the voices of the young folks are here with us too and actually guiding our work. I feel a lot of times I use my auntie status and those of you who know me, you know what I mean. But sometimes we need just to shut the hell up and let other voices find its way into our work. And so, I just wanted to start off about, how our inability to stand in who we are and to do this work can be a huge barrier for, for others to realize our leadership that we bring to the work of strengthening community.
Thank you. Aine, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think from a health perspective, we're today talking about complex systems. It's very similar in direct healthcare services, but also, 90% of our health outcomes are determined by social determinants of health. It's not genetic. It's not because, I inherited this from my mama or my daddy. 90% of it is around these conditions that we're talking about. And so, how do we look at the enabling environment? Right now, the drivers are leading us to death. So how do we work collaboratively to really think about how do we create our own complex system that the drivers lead to prosperity and health? Our name, the Tubman Center for Health and Freedom, is not an adornment. We are an abolitionist organization. We know you cannot have health without freedom and vice versa. So our partnerships, at the county level with KCN, our partnerships with King County, we sit on the Racism is a Public Health Crisis Task Force. Our partnerships at the city level with PHPDA, with Annie and Communities Rise, at the state level, with the Commission on African American Affairs, with Black Futures Co-op Fund. It really takes all of us into the point of being an ecosystem. Every single one of us are either driving health disparities or driving better health outcomes, and we all participate in it. So I think a lot of the time conversations in health get put on individual behavior and not enough on how the systems themselves need interventions and are sick and are making us sick. So we like to focus on the 90% of the social determinants of health to say, this is going to impact our future. So for Tubman Health, in creating a medical home for those most marginalized by mainstream medicine. That is our charge, to open up a clinic by 2025. However, partnerships and the enabling environment that will create better health outcomes is really where a lot of our work sits right now. And we know that, it takes all of us. And it takes all of us to change the trajectory we're on. You can't be neutral on a moving train. The data has been there, it exists. What are the system interventions that we are going to collectively go for to say things need to change?
Yes, thank you. Andrea, what are your thoughts?
I agree wholeheartedly with Celia and Ine. I'll overlay all of that with will. One of the challenges is we lack the will in this country. When I say we, I really mean wealthy people. And I mean people who this system was designed for, dominant society, white people, lack the will, right, to invest. We like to tout as an American, as a country, that we're so strong in so many respects, right, structurally. We talk about how the dollar is dominant, and we'll fight feverishly for that, right? Even through all of the various recessions over the course of our history. And where we're also strong is our diverse demographic. But we are weak in our ability to provide real opportunities for that diverse demographic, hence this racial wealth divide. We saw how people's wills shifted after the advent of COVID. We saw how they were able to tackle, yes, we haven't solved it yet, but really across sector, right, with nonprofit, with government, with corporate, came together to create vaccines and to begin to solve these issues around this pandemic. We have brilliant minds, we have the resources, but clearly the will is not here in our system, in our country, to be able to have everyone, including BIPOC people, achieve economic mobility and close the racial wealth divide.
Thank you. I'm going to throw the next, I'm going to change up the questions a little bit, but they're still the same questions. I just felt like there's this thread around how we've been responding around the pandemic and COVID-19. And I guess I wanted to ask folks in the chat, what are some of the best practices uncovered in effectively engaging, working with orgs in your city and beyond? And also just, I really want to hear a little bit about how have we had to pivot around the pandemic as it relates to this question. Ane, would you like to jump in first?
Yeah, I'll go for the most direct thing. All summer long, we've been providing, it's our Blacksinate campaign, COVID-19 response. So as soon as COVID hit, our organization was doing mass distribution. We partnered with the South End Sewers, community members from our neighborhood who right away got to work in making masks. We were at all the Safeways. We were talking with workers. We know we run this city, whether through being public employees. We're disproportionately in the public sector because that's where we're getting work. We're also in the food service sector, transportation, et cetera. So we also launched Frontline Wellness, which is where we partnered with acupuncturists because we knew and we know because of the endemic of racism before the pandemic, we have both going on, that we have to address racism in the body. And so for us, it's around direct care, direct action, but also changing the conditions. And so some of these partnerships include us partnering with Black Dot. For us in building a premier medical institution in the Puget Sound region with a $40 million annual budget, where are we doing our spending? Who are we partnering with? Where are we procuring our resources? So we're also looking at what our business model looks like. What does that look like from the ground up? So how do we not only center our community in the services being provided, but also within the built environment, also within these financial transactions. And so we've called this our design phase over this last year, and we want to continue to do it. So we're also partnering with Rainier Valley Leadership Academy, a Black-led middle school and high school, to co-design We are launching what we're calling the Freedom Clinic. So before our capital project ends by 2025, we are doing direct services as well as opening up a clinic within the school at RVLA. Again, to address both health and freedom, and having young people, families in the neighborhood design services, design what the built environment looks like. And so in order to have different outcomes, we have to take our ideas and have different arrangements that don't center white supremacy and dominance. It has to center our communities.
Yeah, Celie, I'm gonna let the jump off to you.
I don't. First of all, I don't like following Anye. So and you need to use smaller words.
Okay.
I'm saying. I mean, some of the, I think that question just when you asked it, I was like, what's wrong with him? Because I feel like, when people ask me, what's going on, Celia? I'm like, COVID. The ability for us to shift and working with, local government, and hearing about them shifting to COVID and reminding them, this is the time for you to shift to community. And so our ability to really align ourselves, all of us on the screen, and do things different while we have the opportunity, and through what the pandemic has provided for us. I feel like, I just feel like being part of ERA, and I know Andrea will talk more about that. ERA, this collective of BIPOC leaders coming together to have real conversations around how to fund, what to fund, and that thing like White King says, we're the boss, and really laying down the rule of how you should do this work if you are to fund. And how do we create those spaces where our voices really find the place to guide what's happening within our partner systems and institutions and philanthropy, I think is really critical. I agree with Anye about what feels good to me is about how we are seeing each other in a different way too, and that the relationships, regardless of if you're in White Center, if you're in Southeast Seattle, if you're in the Central District, that those are still your people that need to help you in your work where you are. And so, over the holidays, partnering with King County Equity Now, Bird Bar Place, Africa Town, who are all they're not here right next to White Center, but it's like it felt really great because it's like, here's the bridge, and how do we put our bridges together, the pieces of our bridges together, so the work reaches broadly. So I just really love what you're saying, Anye, about that the partnerships, and that it feels different for many of us in the community, and there's more mobilizing that is happening without our help, right? Mm-hmm. And because they are finding their voices in our collective work through the pandemic. And so the relationships that we have with in the networks that we're in, I feel, this is the time to really have that liberated way of being with each other, but also really being concrete about our ability to disrupt racism and how it exists.
Andrea, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree. I think what was really beautiful that came out of all of these experiences from the past almost 2 years is this level of solidarity that Celia is talking about. I'm experiencing it, I'm seeing it. It's what birthed the BIPOC ED Coalition, the Black Indigenous People of Color Executive Director Coalition of Washington State. And really that coalition just started out of a a couple of us EDs. It was myself, Jody Nishioka from Communities Rise, Victoria from YWE, Ananda from RVC, coming together and saying, hey, we need to check in with each other, because I know that I'm stressed out, and I know my staff is stressed out. I know my organization is being called on more so than ever to step up in the work in the wake of COVID, but also right after the killing of George Floyd. And we thought, well, if we're needing this space where we can commune with one another, I'm sure other BIPOC EDs across the state need it. So we put in a call. We thought maybe 30 people would come to the Zoom. It was 240 executive directors, right? I'm talking 240 strong BIPOC EDs from rural counties, coastal counties, not just suburban and urban, right? And I just saw this level of solidarity with us urban organizations wanting to support our rural brothers and sisters. And again, this was just in that moment, right? It's a 2-hour call, tell us how you're doing. And from then it was, we want more of these, we need more of this, right? And so we realized that there was a responsibility to maybe formalize this thing. We needed to make sure that we kept these spaces to lift up our communities, but also spaces that were non-white, because there's this level of practicing white comfort that happens, whether it's intentional or it's subconscious. We needed to not have to be doing that so that we can rage and heal and console one another, right? So we built a relation to do that, but also to create this unified agenda of priorities, right? We heard 2 distinct things from our EDs from across the state that, and Ine talked about this, health and well-being, especially being in the throes of experiencing these emotional moments of pain and rage and needing to heal was important, and this gross philanthropic redlining that we've been seeing for years in our organizations across the state, right? We're being called on to step up and do the work, but we're grossly under-resourced. And so what came out of it is that we created a pledge at the BIPOC ED Coalition that some of you might have seen. And it's demanding that philanthropy remove their required 5% payout, move it to 10%, and designating that funds for BIPOC communities and BIPOC issues, and providing multi-year funding, meaningful multi-year funding. Meaningful mean we get to design what meaningful is for us, right? And investing in long-term, slow, patient funding for systemic work. Celie referenced ERA earlier. ERA is sort of this blueprint for how that happens. We've been interacting with government. We've come together. There's a coalition of several partner organizations in King County, and it's the Equitable Reconciliation and Recovery. Help me out, Celie. But what it is really, we got tired of funders and policymakers and stakeholders saying, well, yeah, you're right. We need to move more resources to your communities, but we don't know how to do that. Right. We don't know how to interact with your communities. We don't know how do we lay out engagement. We know that. We've been doing that. So ERA is your construct, right? ERA is your blueprint to be able to engage in communities that you have not been engaging in communities that you're not familiar with, that you can hear their voices almost immediately and hear directly from the people, what they say they want, how they say they want it, and also getting the resources to them, right? How do we remove all of these disadvantaging criteria and ways of moving resources so that BIPOC organizations and communities can have access to them? Enough of these rules and reinterpretation of rules that didn't work for us. So ERA is saying, do away with that, do away with your processes and your systems that haven't worked for BIPOC people, and institute our construct, which is getting resources directly to the people, how the people say they want it.
Yeah. I'd like to expand on that a little more too, because I think our example really outlines that too. We were volunteer led our whole first year. I didn't start till this past June, and I left my job to do this. We didn't even have the salary for the CEO position. We had community members that we were working with we had over 300 people donating to us. Then we got our first contract from Bird Bar Place. And so that was the impetus for us to say, the only way to build this is if we have full-time staff. So as a family and as a community, we decided, hey, people said, look, you're going to be the responsible person here. Ine, will you do this? And as a family, we had to say, okay, well, all right, let's take this leap of faith. Because of our people power, everyone was doing this. And I think sometimes we've been getting pigeonholed by the powers that be, like, oh, you're a new institution. No, we're not new at this. We are organized. We have hundreds of years of collective experience in this field. We are now under this banner. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge the work that we have all done in a variety of ways, that now we are organized and clicked in a different kind of way around this fulcrum point of health and freedom. And so that's one of the pushbacks that I have to keep doing against financial institutions who are saying, hey, show me your books. You know, so many health organizations as well as institutions were built out of crisis. And so why are we being treated different now? And the things that we have to prove around our credibility to establish a Black-led health institution.
Thank you. And you guys, we've already actually been answering this next question. What are some of the challenges community is facing in attempting to collaborate in your field? What about cross sector? And some of the things that I'm really hearing are this weird false sense of scarcity that funders are putting out there. Also just figuring out how to make this a sustainable long-term kind of commitment or movement are some of the themes that I'm hearing. Anybody want to expand on that?
I'll say briefly that this is strange, but with ERA, the Equitable Recovery and Reconciliation Alliance, and also with the BIPOC Coalition, we've gotten pushback from white communities, from white EDs, and other white coalitions about why it needs to be BIPOC only. And so I've always thought, my 18 years in this work, the reason for me being in this work, that the conversation around equity is obvious, why it needs to be elevated and it needs to be addressed. And so we found ourselves in a space in the beginning, not so much now, but with ERA and BIPOC Coalition, having to reaffirm why those spaces need to be non-white and why we need to be given the autonomy to construct our own system and to design our solutions and to lead with it, right? So that having to defend that was very strange for me.
Yeah, I think one of the things is, one of the reasons that white people are having a hard time with it is because they don't like losing their power. And so, but we already know, and I know I preach it to the choir, we already know where the power lies. It lies in our communities, on the backs of the folks that we all support and continue to lift up. And so one of the things, one of the models that I would just want to offer up is communities of opportunity. It's, it's a partner with, King County and Seattle Foundation. It's a private-public partnership, and but it's community-led. We still have to deal with the system, right? When we're dealing with King County and Seattle Foundation, the two biggest gatekeepers in the room, but having community there to really ground the values of community and how the communities of opportunity was established and developed. It was because of community. It was on the backs of community. So I want to be really clear about that. And those of you know, I was on the ground floor when Communities of Opportunity was designed and put together. And I remember being approached by, my good friend Michael Brown at Seattle Foundation. And Michael said, Seeley, we want to do this thing. And I was like, shut the fuck up. I don't want to do this. How many more years are we going to continue to, challenge and, kind of blindly lead us because you got the money? It's not happening. So, so to speak to the systems and institutions, especially our colleagues within these systems, You need to have a different kind of conversation. Like, that's your friend, that's your homie, and check them. And so, it's not perfect, but at least it's a model for local government and for philanthropy to kind of check out where community is on the ground making decisions around funds and funding that we know carries a lot of power. So I think the real critical thing is to continue to remind folks at the table, you wouldn't have your job, the local government and philanthropy, you would not have your resources had it not been for the people of color, for Black people in this country. So you got rich because of us.
Yeah.
And being clear about that. And, and when they, when funders come with their theories of change, it's like, okay, you know what, here's ours. And so how do we support each other? How do our white allies, how do we stop them from being, silenced, because the big kahunas in the room, open up your mouth and, speak into it. That's one of the best ways to dismantle racism, but it's also very relational. And so how do we get to a place where the crunchiness is totally okay, and that we work through some of that uncomfortable time with us, and how do we utilize our relationships that we have, even in the systems and philanthropy, in a way that makes sense and that it's accountable. So.
And I'll briefly say that when we think about cross sectors, government has been unreliable, right? And it's a shame, like Celi's point, it's been community stepping up and leading the way and showing them how this can be done. I mean, we have our federal government who can't even pass a regular budget in decades. Right now, they can't even come together and deciding on investing in infrastructure and protecting our most vulnerable people in this country. And corporate, right? They're not pulling their weight as well. And so we do need to see them stepping up more. We do need to see, there's a lot of extraction going on in our society from our communities, talent, other types of resources, and they're not putting back merely what they're putting in is paltry dividends, but they're not putting back nearly what they're getting from our communities. And so I would like to see our government and corporate sector step up more.
For sure. I agree with everything that's been said. And I think there's a hypocrisy in this because, again, what I was sharing about workers and the workforce. Well, who's feeding you? Who's taking care of your children? Who's taking care of your parents? We run this joint. So how can there be this mistrust or extra loopholes that we need to jump through when we are doing the domestic care, when we are doing transportation, food industry, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's this hypocrisy then around financing, that you cannot do X, Y, or Z. How do we know? And it's always this like mythic thing. But we are the managers, we run the day-to-day of all these institutions. If you extracted every person of color out of all these major institutions right now, they wouldn't know what to do. Yeah. So there's this hypocrisy there. Same right now for Tubman Health. There's a plethora of money for health. Yeah. So as I'm trying to raise our operating budget and our capital budget, what are the barriers to access? It's not that there's no money there. Between ARPA, 631 million coming into our county alone, not even the state. When we're talking about a Black-led solution, ask around. Ask around. They'll tell you who it is. And I'm still waiting to be like, okay, who's partnering with us? So what's filling that gap? And to me, that is structural racism. When you invest in, and when public funds and private funds invest in the counter solution to me, it's not that you're not only not investing in us, you're investing in white solutions for Black people. That, when you say it like that, that's crazy. White solutions for Black people.
Yeah.
Where are our own, who's funding our own solutions for ourselves?
Yeah, another interesting dynamic that comes out of it, and I think Andrea, you were mentioning that, alluded to it about the, you know, now you're obligated, right? You receive funding, you've received a grant, now that they feel, you feel obligated because you're trying to help your agency survive and sustain, but you feel obligated. So money is so disorganizing, and it really puts us in a bad place. So our ability to hold our power and yield it, around the development of how to fund and keeping the priorities of the community on the table is so difficult. And so um, I just feel like we continually, even in how philanthropy plays out, we're totally co-opted in many ways, And so how how do we really build those relationships where truth is in the center of the work that we're doing together? So yeah.
This is a good segue to one of the next questions I had is, who is being left out of these collaborative efforts and how do we bring them into this conversation? And just if you guys can speak to like how funding is creating that dynamic where it's actually pushing, you were just saying it perfectly a little bit ago, but I'll open it up. I know Celie, you want to maybe take the first stab at this and we'll just popcorn it out.
Yeah, and I think it's been said all day. I don't, obviously, Black voices, BIPOC communities have been left out of these conversations. But I also want to lift up our ability to bring in youth and young voices. The, you know, how are we as leaders of color, what is the spaces that we're creating for our young people to see themselves in this role and to also believe in them as we believe in each other? I think is one of the things that we need to continue to work on. I alluded, I'm always telling folks, my generation, sometimes we just get out of the room, get up and leave the room. So to resist the urge to guide it, and to lead it. And I just think there is so much wisdom. I was in one of the earlier breakouts with Taj and Chloe and Brittany, and I said to them, I said, you guys are some badass leaders, and they're working in finance, and they're going to be my BFFs, by the way. But there's so much that we can learn from our young people. It's just they need the opportunities to speak out and to speak up. So I just think that's one of the best ways. The best way to ground our work in what we have done together with community is to let the young people also be grounded in that too. I think that's our accountability to our communities, is ensuring that the young voices are part of the collective voice that we do in this work. So. Come on, you all. Let's go.
I was going to just ask if folks could maybe speak to how are you authentically partnering with young people, not just tokenizing them and doing like the panel and you kind of, give them a gift card and call it a wrap, but like, how are you truly bringing in young people into this work, helping build up their capacity, helping them be true partners in the work that you guys are doing?
I agree with Celie that we don't do enough to bring in our youth. There's been ever since the killing of George Floyd, we saw our young activists in the streets. A lot of them were youth, right? This is why we created the Black Future Co-op Fund, is that we saw our young people in these streets demanding change. And we did not feel comfortable sitting in our chairs in our boardrooms, our offices, while that was happening in the streets. So we thought we'd complement what they were doing, which is make our demands in proximity to where we work, which is demands of philanthropy. And so we learned there that our youth carry also the communal weight of our ancestors. They have their vision and view for the future of our people, and we need to bring them in sooner than later. One of the things that we've been exploring, and I know that RVC is actually doing this, is this idea of liberatory power, right, within your organizations. That this impossible ED role that happens, you know, we've mirrored that from our white male counterparts, that there's this one person at the top that wields and holds all the power. And we've been looking at, and especially in the BIPOC ED Coalition, one, to give our EDs and our leadership time to rest and reset, but also model power sharing and disaggregate it down through your organization, including those youth voices. So we're looking at how do we institutionalize it in our nonprofits, that power sharing, but also doing that in community, because our organizations are guided by our community, and the youth are the future of our world. We can't wait to bring them along, right? We can't wait till we're dying on the job, leaving ill. We need to call them in now and model that power sharing and give them the autonomy and the resources to lead with us.
That's right. That's right.
Definitely. For us, it's spot on with what you both have said. I think structurally within our institution, so we have a youth board member who is 16, who sits on our board, and I report to them. We also have an internship program for young people. And then our deliberate partnership with Rainier Valley Leadership Academy, where young people are co-designing what a healthy future looks like, again, in terms of our built environment, but also in terms of our soft environment. What should an exam look like? What should it feel like? What are the exchanges that should occur? Again, where you have your agency and your autonomy, because you know your body best. You know, how do we center that experience? So it's a question that we've asked ourselves, not only in our values and our principles, but how do you operationalize those values around, it's not young people having a seat at your table, this is their table. We're talking about generations. I came from people, and my people will continue. We're not dying. we're coming. You're not gonna kill us. And that is also for our young people. Again, they haven't been socialized in the same way that many of us adults have been in these institutions. And so their ability, you know, to think beyond anything we can is our greatest asset as a community. It's their visioning. It's their world.
No, amen to that.
Thank you. Transitioning to the next question, how do you push the needle from passive engagement to active collaboration and or engagement? And I really want to like kind of flesh this out. Think about how do we move past like, hey, we're informing you or we're telling you about something, but really talking about inclusion. Like, how do we shift the needle to that place where folks really feel like they belong in partnerships and collaboration? Now I'm going to start with you, Andrea.
You know, and I'll go back again to the BIPOC ED Coalition, is that we inserted ourselves, right? We could no longer wait. We saw so much will being exercised to respond to the effects of COVID and really on white populations, right? Didn't see a whole lot being responsive towards Black and brown bodies. And so the impetus to creating the BIPOC ED Coalition was to build this power in numbers and assert ourselves and then make our demands. And I'm happy to say that that pledge has been signed by 11 funders so far. And so we're going to continue to grow that list. And we're going to grow that list with funders beyond Washington State and beyond the region. But it started with us inserting ourselves and deciding we will no longer wait. This cannot be incremental. And we saw, right, with trillions of dollars moving through our economy in response to COVID, but not prioritizing BIPOC communities, but we saw the will to move that money We saw the will to make that capital flexible. So we took advantage of that and designed our construct, designing it through ERA, but also building power in numbers with the BIPOC PD Coalition.
As I was sharing earlier around just complex systems, it takes all of us. And so I really even appreciated today around asking what's our role for each of us. Because another point of white supremacy is around this individualistic behavior, that it's about one single leader. And what Celie said is, no, we're all leaders, and we're all charged to then take care of the whole. So then where do we plug in? And again, you cannot be neutral on a moving train. So for me, in partnership, I also have to be explicit with people around our values. That's the first thing I share in any partnership meeting. It's, here are Tubman's values and guiding principles. Do you believe that?
Right.
And there's even people who look like me who do not believe in Tubman's guiding principles. And so again, oppression affects all of us.
Exactly.
And who's willing to work on it again and change the tide and raise the tide for all ships? Again, it's not just about Tubman health, it's about our collective health, our communal health, and about the ecosystem. And so we look to partner at all levels and scales with folks who are saying, let's raise the tide for all ships.
I know I typically, those of you who know me, a lot of my community organizing has been around education. And I say a lot in classrooms to teachers, to brand new teachers coming out, getting ready to come out into the community. If you don't believe in the kids that are going to come in front of you, find a new job.
Yes.
You have to believe. You have to believe in these children that'll sit in front of you. You represent power. You represent the system. And you need to figure out how they become your boss, not the superintendent, these kids in your classroom. And so our ability to model how we model for young people that they are leaders is, bring them with us when we are doing stuff like this, and include them in conversations. I mean, Aaron will tell you, you learn by fire. You come to this meeting, we're going to figure out how to build this building in White Center. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I know. Neither do I. You're going to help me figure it out. So it's because I believe in our community. I believe in young people, and that we learn too from what they see and what we may not see because we're conditioned. And so, but I just have to keep saying, you've got to believe in this community. The stuff, I'm working with King County around rental assistance, and I know one of you guys are rolling your eyes, but it's such a fucking cluster. And one of my things that I kept saying to the county, if you believed in us, you would have let us help you figure this out. And so,
yes,
yeah, and that's not rocket science. I believe in my kids to do the right thing. So why can't you be hopeful in what we can do as community? And so the simple stuff, we keep forgetting the simple stuff that we know grounds us, and reminding institutions of the power and wisdom that communities hold, and frankly, their belief in what we do.
There it is.
Right?
Yep. Done. Conversation over.
Whoop, there it is.
Yeah.
All right, just shut down the Zoom. We're done.
Yeah, we're done. Done.
Man.
Crazy people. Ebony, what'd you get me involved in?
I know, Ebony. I don't even know you. Thanks, Ebony.
No, I'm not going to try to pick on Ebony, man.
Look, this is what I do. I give space for others. That's what I'm here to do. Give space for those that are on the ground, that is doing the hard work. So thank you all for everything that you do. And I just want to say just real quick, because we just looking at the time, if there's any questions from those in the audience, if you have any questions from any of our esteemed guests, our speakers, please shoot them in the chat box so we can get them out. So again, any questions, please send over to the panelists. Thank you. And
questions, I just gotta say, mic drop on y'all, man. You guys came through. My queens, man. That's all. I was over here going ham the whole time. Just thank you so much, Aaron, for great facilitation. All three of y'all know how much I adore you and your work and your energy. And what a great session at the end of this summit. Just to be honest, I'm so thankful to be in the work of all of you.
Likewise, Triana, back at you, honey. You're in the throes of this work too.
Yeah. All of you badass sisters watching this panel, shoot, we all own this.
We do. I mean, and I love that we're focusing more deeply on us, right? Yeah. Us, connection with us, coalition building with us, and resourcing us. That's what needs to happen to build an effective collaboration.
Right. Absolutely.
Can you guys maybe share a little bit about what are ways that you are practicing wellness and being intentional about protecting yourself and your energy and how through all this, right? Like on top of a global pandemic, we're still doing the work. So yeah, just strategies, suggestions, what's worked well to make sure that you're maintaining wellness in your life.
So for me, many of you know, I like to be out there with my feet on the pavement. So I run a couple times a week, or I'm walking. I'm drinking at least 64 ounces of water per day. And it's about figuring out, I've encouraged my staff at the organization to figure out what is optimal for you to feel like you are nurtured, you're well taken care of, so you can be in the work and feel fully fortified. So for each person, it's different, right? So for me, it started with the assessment of what do I need to feel like my whole self, physically and psychologically, so that I can step into the work and not be burnt out, right? So it's an understanding of myself, my limitations, where I can stretch myself, but I know I got to eat healthy. I'm very mindful of that. I may not always do that. I drink my water. I try to get at least 7 hours of sleep where I can. And I try to be really aware of the stress that's being consumed in my body and how I expel that.
Yeah, for myself and for our staff, volunteers, everybody, I say, we have to get high on our own supply. So I am a participant in each and every one of Tubman Health's programs. We have 6 weeks paid vacation for all staff.
Don't get any ideas out on.
We cover 100% benefits for yourself and for all of your dependents. So for us, it's very important. Again, our structures reflect our values, and then we talk and reflect around our own programming because we're also the participants. How did we experience this? What is this like? Because again, I have to know what my food tastes like. I can't just be cooking and not tasting the food. So as we're going, we're all tasting, we're all cooking together. And that's how we know we're doing a good job. And I've gotten a lot of feedback too, by being a participant. When people ask, oh, who runs this organization? And someone just points over there and says, that person there. People have been like, what? You're ahead of this organization. You're sitting here doing the same thing that I'm doing. It also allows me direct connection. Again, high on my own supply. I am the #1 advocate spokesperson because I know what it tastes like, feels like, smells like.
She's like a Yoda. She's like a Yoda, man.
Tubman Health, baby, come through.
Oh, that's beautiful. You know, I'm a God-fearing woman, and I feel like the pandemic is God's way of telling us to slow down and, you know, be with your family. You know, I think is another message that I've gotten. You know, for self-care, you know, muck shoot, margaritas, right? Just keeping it real, y'all. You know, the I just think because we're at home, and I think we talked about this in one of the breakout rooms, that now that we're at home, you know, our ability to be present with your family members. The nice thing is they see you in your work too, in a different way, and you know, the self-care is really hard for those of us who work in communities. I know, because y'all be running yourselves ragged, and now you have to run yourself ragged at home. So, you know, it really is, you know, I just urge everybody just to, you know, take some time to just to be still and to, you know, reflect on what's happening around you. That actually, for me, gives me energy for the work, and really to elevate the consciousness of what you're doing in community in your house. And you know, because we all either have partners or husbands, or, you know, that know what we do but don't know what we do. You know what I'm saying? And so, you know, I just feel like I just need to figure out how to know that many of us who work, everybody here, I'm sure this applies to you too. There's a fine line between work and home, or work and home, and that we straddle that a lot because our work is our life, right? And so now it literally, for those of us who've been homebound for so long, it really is that is true. And so, you know, making sure that you have some peace and reflection time for you to think about the work, and staying connected with your friends and families and elders and young people, you know, has been great self-care for me. So
Here, and I'll do a quick plug. So the BIPOC ED Coalition, our goal is to raise enough money. Our goal is not necessarily to raise money, it's to steer funders towards all of our BIPOC-led organizations. But we do have this goal around raising enough funds that any BIPOC ED that wants to take a paid sabbatical in Washington State will pay for it. Right now, we're raising funds that if you want to take a week away from work and home, to Sully's point, because there's a fine line there, we will pay for that week. And so we've got to institute health and wellness as part of the work.
that's wonderful. That's great. Because I know we all do this. We all take time off, and then we use that time off from work to go to other meetings while we're on vacation.
Yeah.
Right. See, I see people nodding. And so, we really need to figure out how to take care of ourselves. We need you all.
Yep. Just wanted to transition a little bit. We got our first question of the day from Blishta. What are ways BIPOC folks working in government, a system that is unreliable, as Andrea pointed out, and at times has caused harm, cause harm, can support you in your effort?
It's about being that voice at the table. You know, there's a lot of money that also came through government, the ARPA funds. And my understanding, at least in Washington State, a lot of those tranches were already divvied up and decided at the top. A lot of us people of BIPOC people are not at the top, or even if we are, we don't have sway. And so it was, how do we leverage? So for instance, creating the Black Future Co-op Fund, we leveraged, the four of us co-founders leveraged our relationship with our common funder, who was Seattle Foundation. And we said, we want to raise $25 million. We want you to help us, and we want the fund to sit at Seattle Foundation until we have the infrastructure to move it out. Similar in government, when there were those conversations about money coming, resources being allocated, is being opportunistic and raising up the need for BIPOC investment, raising up that it was said several times today. I know that some people are really cerebral and heady about this. And so attacking it from, when we all do better, we all do better. And investing in BIPOC communities is the tide that will raise all boats. And so it's just being there to whisper in the ear of your supervisor, to whisper in the ear of your higher ups, to keep and hold up that funding BIPOC communities is about investing in all communities, right? And so hopefully that answers your questions, but I know that there's been some talk, at least in the state of Washington, about funding that's come into our state that was already decided and allocated, and we've had to go up against them, certain agencies, about de-obligating those funds and starting over again. And it's created, some upheaval, but well worth it. So us working on the outside, happy to work with you on the inside to make sure that those shifts happen. But it starts with conversation. It starts with who's not at the table, who's not being considered, asking those questions, sort of leading them to the water. Hopefully that answers the question.
For sure. I'd like to add to that. I mentioned at the county level, we participate in the Racism as a Public Health Crisis kind of task force group. And it's to look at how to distribute $25 million from the ARPA funding. And so the goal of that group is to be anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and think about what strategies, again, to deploy in doing so. But then it begs the question, right? If this pot of funding is anti-racist, anti-oppressive, what does that say about the other funding? Is that the racist funding, right? So then you have to look at the whole pie and say, it's not just what's going on in this pocket or this carve out, but what's going on with the whole pie? What's up with the $12 billion, almost $13 billion county budget? Again, social determinants of health, where we know 80% to 90% of our health outcomes are determined by the conditions. So again, what's up with the 12 billion? And how do we kind of unlock that? And then comparing apples and oranges. A lot of the times our organizations get relegated into, oh, this is a community effort. But if a white organization did the exact same thing, they're going to say, look at this premier health institution. Oh, it's innovative and cutting edge, right? So the descriptors of the same kind of work, but how it's racialized and racial coding. And then the impacts on our bodies, there's plenty of literature if you just look at racial weathering, right? How discrimination impacts our bodies. Tons of literature on it, right? Racialized weathering. So again, you look at this past week, our King County Council member, Gurmai Zahalai, an ad was put out, a racist ad. Basically, he had nothing to do with this political anything, but they wanted to use his face because they needed a black face, right? And you think about, he's doing his job, he's at work, and now we can couple that with racialized weathering and say, look, he's just at work doing his job, and he's a county elected official who we are watching get more sick publicly in front of all of us. The data is there.
Yeah, say that.
So for us, it's like, look at the whole picture. Look what's happening to all of us. It's not which hat we're wearing. It's how racism, again, is impacting, and anti-Blackness is the driver to why we are sick.
Yeah, and then, Edgar Mai's the only African American, or the only Black elected in the state at county level, right? I think that's true. I think he's the only one in the state. And so I would put my question back to you too, Blishta. How can we help you? Because what you just shared about Gramai is the same for the limited. I can count on one hand how many Black people, BIPOC people work in local government who are getting sick.
Yeah.
Right. And I work with Blishta, we all do. But my thing is just bring us the bullshit.
Yeah.
The bullshit that you hear, just bring it to us. And so we can address it, so we can support what you're trying to do within the system, because, just bring it, because I want to hear them say that shit to us.
Yeah.
And we could, BIPOC folks who are in local government at any level, many of you got your job because of community. So bring that bullshit to us. If they're telling you some shit, bring it. Let us know, because that gives us the tools to develop the strategy to address that, and to check them, and to remind folks, especially something like King County, who touts their race and social justice work. The only county in the country that racism is a disease. Wow. Seriously? It's been a disease for the fucking existence of this country. So, sorry, Mom. I know my mom's up there like, what? Oh, stop swearing. But so challenge them. They tout it all the time. It gets touted all the time, King County and their race and social justice work. Bring it. Just bring it to us. Let us help figure it out. What's the strategy to really center BIPOC communities in decision making?
Thank you. We are starting to get kind of close to the end of the time of the panel, so I was wondering if folks wanted to just do a quick round of just some final thoughts, anything, some takeaways that you really appreciated from today, just any other nuggets of amazing wisdom you all want to share with us.
Yeah, I believe one of the attendees earlier, his name was Amari, had mentioned about the systems being dismantled and how its effects on us. And I agree, right? It's falling apart, whether the system that was the people that benefited from the system, like it or not, it is falling apart. And we're pushing on it, which is wonderful to dismantle it. But what I will say is that given that this panel is about collaboration, we should be focusing, as that system is falling apart, because it is, we should be focusing more deeply on ourselves, right? We've heard the theme of nurturing ourselves, taking care of ourselves, and this idea of solidarity and connecting with one another, because we want us to be able to stay in this work, right? We want our approach to be one of working with each other to tackle these barriers. We know that we can't do this work alone. And so we want those who have had the desire and those who have the resources and those who have the capacity and capability to all come together. It's all equally important, right? No one group or person is more important than another in our BIPOC communities. And so we want to be able to work together to be able to respond to a system that is dismantling, whether we want it or not, right? And I'd say collaboration is key, because BIPOC people are worth it, and because Black people are worth it.
And just to expand upon that, I brought that up. I didn't want to just paint a big picture. I just wanted to point out that as people of color, we face a backlash. You see it now with these militia groups and stuff like that. People feel that they're losing things. And so us as people of color seizing the means of production and getting credentials and learning how the avenues of power and influence work, that's a way of us defending ourselves. If we can, do things like make the plans for our neighborhoods instead of being displaced and gentrified and priced out of areas that we've traditionally lived in, that's a means of control. And I think that's at the root of it. That being said, I don't have much faith in the system, but I think that we have a responsibility to at least try.
Yeah.
And stack the deck in our favor as much as we can, for lack of a better phrasing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Celia, do you have some final thoughts, nuggets of wisdom you want to impart to us? Hear me?
I love you all. I just, you know, somebody has your back, and for you, all of you to, you know, I need all of you, and that even the struggles that we're in, that remember they're in service to our ability to be stronger as community. And so relationships do matter. And you know, don't, you know, I feel like I need to have an Obama moment or something, but you are the people we've been waiting for. So I just, you know, love on each other. We're all broken. We're working in communities that are broken, but you know, there's also a huge amount of hope that also reside or that live in our communities that we work in. So I'm so thankful to God for all of you.
Thank you. I want to drop the mic. This is the moment.
They've already dropped the mic, and so many people on this call I've seen them present and talk at other spaces, and I've been in community with them. But it's definitely to what Celia said. It's like, I love each of you. You know, who keeps us safe? We keep us safe, and no one else is going to do that. So thank each of you.
Whew. Well, this has been the highlight of the week, the highlight of October, and we're not even done with October, and nothing is gonna top today. So, you know, I just want to thank all of you amazing.
No, don't move it.
Oh. All of y'all were amazing. I could not stop jotting down notes and reflections, and this has just been such a rewarding and fulfilling time. And I'm just truly fortunate and blessed to be here with y'all. So thank you for the time that you shared with us.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Celie. Thank you, Aine. Thank you to our audience.
Yes, thank you all.
Prosperity Now team. Thank you, Annie.
Yeah. And I guess I will pass it on to anybody? Ebony?
Yes.
Ebony. Yeah.
Thank you. Wow. So that was just an amazing panel discussion. I definitely want to thank all of our guest panelists and our leaders who just, you know, you guys kept it real. You gave us some real examples and solutions to how we can just really create some solidarity, to create some systems and ways of supporting BIPOC communities in a way where we're leading the charge and we're not depending on anyone else to do it, but also making sure that that accountability is there for the governments and philanthropic and other corporate funders in this space. And so, you know, we've been together for a long time. I know this has been a very early and long day for those of you guys in Seattle. I wish we could have been there in person. That was the original intention, but here we are. You know, that is one of the results of being in the pandemic, but I definitely think that we still hit our goal of what we wanted to do around really bringing together some stakeholders, folks on the ground who are doing this work, who are not really trying to just use the space as a way to talk about what's wrong, but really trying to lift up some solutions, some creative, innovative ways of how we can shift these dynamics, shift these narratives, and shift the way in which we are even approaching the work, working along with each other, working in support of each other, creating that space for each other so that we can all influence the work and the systems that are just really holding back BIPOC communities from being able to have that economic sustainability and mobility that we are really thriving for. I want to thank you all for making time and space in your time for us today. Just a reminder, this was a summit that is co-hosted between Prosperity Now and JP Morgan. So I just want to again thank Carla for her words and being here with us today and really having trust in us to do the work that we do and just really letting us do what we do best, which is to provide space for our leaders, those who we know who are doing great work. I want to thank my Building High Impact for Nonprofits of Color leaders and our guests, panelists again, for just your partnership and your support in the development of this just magnificent content and summit that we've been able to have. It's been a rich conversation for me. I hope it's been a rich conversation for all of you as well. I want to thank my extended Prosperity Now team for your support, and specifically Maddie Santana, who I'm pretty sure you guys have all interacted with in some ways, who has been our producer in a way for today, as well as Vanna Cure from really helping to carry this out and bringing in the advocacy lens. I also want to make sure that I give a shout out to Nikia Winfield for her thought partnership on and facilitation for all of the group outs and just really helping us to think through how we can make this an engaging experience for all of you. And I want to thank you again for joining us today. And I hope you got some motivation, some incentives to stay engaged and to continue the fight. We know it's a hard fight. We know it's a long fight, but it's a fight that's needed. We are all here because we're passionate about this, because this is what we live and breathe. And we are really thriving for a more equitable Seattle. And I'm pretty sure that we will get there. So if you like what you heard today, please know that this has been recorded. We will be sharing the video as well as the slide that I shared earlier today, just around what are some of those disparities that we're looking at when it comes to the racial wealth divide nationally, as well as Seattle. We will also have the report available. We also have a profile of all of our Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color partners. It includes Seattle as well as Minneapolis, because this is also a project that we're doing simultaneously in Minneapolis. We have their summit actually next week. And so I motivate you. I hope that you really take the opportunity to get familiar with the profiles. If you like what you heard from our organizations, please reach out to them and connect with them, figure out some ways to be able to support the work that they're doing. And I really hope that this conversation moves into some action. And so with that, I am going to close the meeting out. Again, thank you again for your time, your patience, your engagement, your thoughtful questions, your thoughtful insights, all of your expertise. Nothing cannot be done without any of you. And as we mentioned today, bring the youth into this, bring other people who should be missing at the table. We all have a responsibility to bring those who are missing to this table. So with that, thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, Ebony. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.